A man born into wealth and privilege, an Oxford athlete with his sights set on Parliament, who instead became one of the most influential voices in the Church of England. A man described as a man of granite with a heart of a child. Today, we're diving into the extraordinary life of John Charles Reilly. Welcome to the Church History Podcast, where we explore the lives and legacies of the great men and women from church history. I'm your host, Lorelee Siemens, and today we're telling the story of a man who wrote the books I bought when I was in university. He literally wrote the textbooks I studied from. This is the story of the man who wrote the textbooks most Protestant pastors study from in university. But first, if you love church history, check out these two books I've written. My new book, The Church is Corrupt, is available for order. I previously published the book, The Church is Born, which was part 1 in our series, and that delved into the creation of the church. But my second book picks up where the first one left off. It offers a unique and insightful perspective on the church's journey. Discover the rich history of the church, its triumphs, its failures, and its heroes. In this second book in the series on church history, we journey through the pivotal moments that shaped Christianity as we know it. From the foundational theology of the early church to the inspiring lives of great men and women who boldly stood for their faith. Explore the church's role during the Crusades, the Inquisitions, and even the discovery of America. Learn how over centuries the church began to slowly lose its way, setting the stage for the monumental changes just before the Protestant Reformation. With each chapter highlighting a different story, you're going to be inspired by the heroes of our faith and challenged to reflect on the lessons from the church's successes and its stumbles. Whether you're a seasoned historian or just beginning your exploration of church history, this book offers valuable insights for everyone. Both books, The Church is Born and The Church is Compromised, are available on Amazon for you to order. So if you haven't gotten the first book, why not get both today and delve into the comprehensive understanding of the church's journey? John Charles Reilly lived from 1816 to 1900, and he wasn't just a clergyman. He was an evangelical Anglican bishop. He was a prolific writer and a preacher whose words are still used today. In this episode, we're going to follow his journey from his privileged upbringing all the way to a pulpit in Liverpool. He had so many personal trials and triumphs, and he became a legacy that is still inspiring people over a century later. Let's start at the very beginning. John Charles Reilly was born on May 10th, 1816 in England. He was the eldest son of John Reilly, who was a private banker and a member of Parliament. And his mom was Susanna Hurt. Her family came from Derbyshire. The Reillys were very well off, and they had roots in Methodism from the days of John Wesley, who we've talked about in past episodes. But they had settled into what had become more of an unenthusiastic comfort in the Church of England. Young John Charles grew up with every advantage you could possibly want. And at age 12, he was sent to Eton, which is one of England's top schools. And he stood out, not just because he was so smart, but he was also extremely good at sports. He was very athletic. He rowed, he played cricket, and he became the captain of the cricket team. Then he ended up going to Oxford in 1834. And there he became the captain of the cricket team while also being a very important part of the rowing team. John Charles was so brilliant. He became a Craven Scholar in 1836, and he graduated first class with literary humanities, which is classics and philosophy. And later he got an MA in 1871, and he got a Doctor of Divinity in 1880. John Charles had big plans. He studied law in London, and his main aim was to follow his father. He would be going to politics and banking. I want you to just picture him for a second. He was this very tall, very good-looking, athletic man, 6 feet, 3.5 inches. He had the whole world at his feet. This was the young man every other man wanted to be. Life was great. Raised in a wealthy home, political power family, so many degrees, John Charles could be anything he wanted. The whole world was at his feet. And then, suddenly, everything changed overnight. In 1841, his father's banking investments all collapsed, literally overnight. The Reilly family went from riches to ruin. John Charles later called it the blackest chapter of his life. His political dreams were done. His financial backing, gone. It was a turning point he never saw coming. Imagine being at the top of society, and then in just one day, you're at the bottom. Often when we're at the top of the world, we don't realize that we need God. And it's often when we lose everything, we realize all we need is God. And that is what happened to John Charles. When John Charles lost everything, he remembered something that had happened a few years earlier. In 1837, he'd been recovering from a chest infection, something that had plagued him on and off. And during that time, he'd picked up his Bible and started reading it. And one verse had hit him like a thunderbolt. Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9. By grace are you saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God. Nothing appeared so clear and distinct at that moment as his own sinfulness, Christ's perfection, and the value of the Bible. This wasn't just a moment. This was his conversion. This is when he immediately rejected ideas of baptismal regeneration and embraced the evangelical faith. Now, fast forward to 1841. Suddenly his political careers are in ashes. And Reilly felt, and this is what he wrote in his words, he was shot up to the ministry. It wasn't that he thought of the church as a backup plan. It was that he felt God had called him to ministry, and to make sure Reilly didn't deviate from that plan, God had removed all other options. He was ordained in the Church of England that December. His first job was in a small Hampshire parish. He wasn't subtle. His preaching packed the church with farm workers. Then in 1843, he became the rector at St. Thomas in Winchester. He found when he first arrived, this place was spiritually dead. Worldliness was reigning supreme in the church. But as he began preaching God's word, it turned around. Pews were filled, and he started Bible studies. People became hungry to really study the Bible. But life was still difficult for John Charles. London smog had already worsened his health. He was in desperate need of cleaner air. So he moved forward into rural ministry. For the next few decades, John Charles settled into parish life. In 1844, he took over a small church in Suffolk. And that's where he really found his stride. And he started writing tracts. He wrote over 200 of them, and millions began circulating worldwide, and they were translated into multiple languages. This is when he began writing his series, Expository Thoughts, starting on the Gospels, beginning with Matthew. Now, during this time, John Charles fell in love with a beautiful young woman named Matilda. He married her in 1845. Matilda became pregnant with their daughter, and when she was born, they named her Georgina. John Charles was preaching and writing in rural Suffolk with his wife and baby girl, not the life he had planned as a young man, but the life he loved. But hardship and tragedy just seemed to follow John. 2 years into his marriage with Matilda, she caught the flu. But instead of just a few days of rest, the flu tore through Matilda's body, and in just a matter of days, she died, leaving John a widow and a single father. At that point, he was just 31 years old. It was as if he had lost everything again. But John had his faith in God, and he continued in his ministry, pushing through his grief to keep the ministry moving forward. 3 years later, John met Jessie Walker. They were married and had 4 children. But life's hardship was not finished with John. A few years into their marriage, Jessie was diagnosed with Bright's disease. Now, you might be wondering, what's Bright's disease? Well, back in John Charles' day, it was this catch-all term for kidney problems. named after a doctor who spotted the signs. So there was swelling and tiredness and trouble with your kidney filtering things properly. For Jesse, it probably meant years of feeling weak and getting weaker and weaker, and there was no treatment available. Today we would call it maybe chronic kidney disease. And we have ways to help that. But in 1860, it was a thief that took her life at age 38, leaving Reilly to carry on alone with his children. Reilly was left with 5 young children and a heavy heart. He wrote about the strain of entertaining his boys alone, wondering how he would survive it. 1 year after the death of his second wife, John moved his family to Stroudsbrook, and he took the position of vicar. That is where he met a young woman named Henrietta, and John married her. She was a great wife and supported his ministry and helped him raise his 5 children. At Stroudsbrook, he restored the church, and immediately he earned this national reputation. His preaching was straightforward, his stance firmly evangelical. People started noticing his towering figure, literally and figuratively. He was defending his faith, but with a warm and approachable style. In the year 1880, at age 64, his life took another leap. Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli asked him to become the first bishop of Liverpool. This was an area with 1.1 million people. They were dock workers, immigrants, most extreme poverty. This was an area in desperate need of a shepherd to lead them, a pastor to teach them, and someone to help them find their way out of poverty. In just a couple of years, he had built 42 churches in the area, but he also built halls where people could come to get help. He built 50 mission halls. He saw that many people in the area couldn't read, so how were they going to read the Bible? But he also noticed those who could read were looking for work. So he hired lay scripture readers to reach out to the masses and to set up clergy pension funds. Some in the higher areas of the church were angry. They thought money raised should build these grand cathedrals, but instead, John was putting the money towards paying people to go out and read the Bible. But John said what he wanted was living agents, people spreading the gospel, not just bricks and mortar. I want you to picture this, a bearded man, 6 feet and 3 inches, standing tall and determined. This was a man you don't want to disagree with. But at the same time, he had a warm heart that loved everyone. The pain he had gone through in his life had prepared him to see the people and love them. Even though he had been raised in the highest levels of society with all the wealth you can imagine, because of all the hurt in his life, he connected with the working class, and they loved him. In 1889, his wife Henrietta passed away. They had been married for 28 years. She had raised his children as her own and served the poor alongside him. He continued his ministry without her for 1 year. He served until March 1st, 1900, and 3 months after he retired, on June 10th, Trinity Sunday, he died at age 83. His funeral was held in the All Saints Church in Liverpool. The graveyard overflowed with poor people who came by carts and buses to honor him, and they buried him with a Bible in his hands, a fitting end. So what is he remembered for? Well, he's remembered as J.C. Reilly. His writings are a huge part of what he is remembered for. His expository thoughts on the gospel, which are 7 volumes, are still in print, and is what I studied in school and the books I still have in my library today, along with some of his other books, Holiness and Christian Leaders of the 18th Century. His writings are clear and practical, and he was influenced by everyone from John Bunyan all the way to Shakespeare. This is one of the quotes from him that I love. Men fell in private long before they fall in public. J.C. Reilly was a champion of evangelicalism, and he was also a critic of ritualism. He wanted substance, not fancy ceremonies. His life is a testament to how God can take ambition and adversity and forge them together into something eternal. His life shows how you can go from financial ruin to spiritual richness. This man is truly a beacon of evangelical truth. A man who lost everything and then gave everything. And if you're looking for a book to read, I encourage you to get Expository Thoughts. I hope you enjoyed this short journey through the life of J.C. Reilly. If you enjoyed it, share it with a friend. Until next time, continue listening. In our next episode, we're heading to Russia, where we're going to hear the story of a man named Ivan Prokhanov. You don't want to miss that episode. I'll see you next week. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode. We release new content every Monday. And don't forget to check out our website at LoreleeSiemens.com for more information and additional resources. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week as we continue our journey through the incredible history of the church.